Hi, George.
Hi, John.
Let's start by talking about the origins of HPL. What's the story?
Well, when I first joined IMD, I started with conflict management, mediation, and then moved over into leadership. And if you'll remember, well, maybe it was before your time, we had the Mobilizing People program that was very successful. And Peter Raj had the idea, well, how about doing an advanced program, a sort of program to follow MP? And his idea was to do a helicopter version of bringing different leadership faculty in and presenting a half day. And I thought, well, I don't quite think that will work. And I pushed back, which shocked him a little bit in those days. That was a little courageous. And he said, well, what's your idea? And I said, well, I think people come not to be entertained, but to learn. The executives want to learn. We need a red thread. Yeah. And so he said, well, you have an idea? And I said, give me a few days and I'll put something together. And so that was the origins of how it started, with the red thread of emotional intelligence and the whole idea of the leader themselves as the case, because it was not to be a trait kind of training. It was to look at how they are holding themselves back from being as successful as they could be. So that was the origin, and we launched that within a very short time, maybe 4 months, and it was very successful with 40 people.
Obviously, the program has evolved a lot over time. As you know, you've learned plenty of things, and as the world has changed. But are there some elements, even if we go back to those first programs, that we would recognize from HPL today?
Oh yeah, we had those basic pillars: mind's eye, how you focus, bonding cycle, and the way you connect, grief and the role of grief in the whole process, secure base, and dialogue and negotiation. Those were the key elements.
HPL is now known for many things, but one of the things that makes it so different than other programs is the focus that you give on managing grief and loss and separation as being such an essential part of being an effective leader. Where does that come from?
That comes from behavioral economics, and that was already present in 1992. And that was one of the things that I convinced Peter we needed. We need some kind of emotional experience. They don't come just for the intellectual part. They're good leaders, and they need to understand how emotions play into motivation. So behavioral economics idea is that loss is affecting up to 80% of decision making. So it was a small jump to be able to include emotional intelligence. And I knew Dan Goldman quite well, and I used his material of emotional intelligence and brought that in. So that was there from the get-go.
Yeah. What are some of the elements that have been added? What are a couple of the key things that you've added along the way?
Well, I think the main thing is emotion, how emotion is part of motivation. The other thing we've added is an in-depth look at dialogue. And you know how this works. You're an expert on dialogue. How to get leaders to talk less, more direct, more crisp. Say it as it is. So that became part of it. And the whole mind's eye concept has advanced. And the brain science. We don't do a lot with the neuroscience. But of course, the brain is very involved in leadership and how the brain works and understanding the states. And there was, in the beginning, always the use of transactional analysis, not as the primary subject, but as a background. So the idea of state, how do we get that right state? And the idea of how do transactions work? How do people talk? How do they influence? And understanding difficult conversations and how people play victim and rescuer and persecutor, and how the early decisions. And then the major change was about 6 years ago when the whole idea of trauma and leadership started to emerge in the literature. And then looking at Gabramate and all that concepts about trauma. So now we include this very powerful question, and this was a game changer. Not what is wrong with you, what happened to you? And where in the beginning did your relationship with mother, father, grandparents, teachers, etc., throughout your life influence your leadership?
And what kind of impact do you think the program has had on participants over the years? What do you see?
I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. And it is, for many people, transformational because they are leading without knowing who they are really as a leader. They're looking for a toolkit. I think in the very beginning days, they came looking for a toolkit. Well, how can I lead better? But then we changed the focus from tools or skills to how do we build a relationship? And then at the same time, things were happening in the transition of leadership. And as you, I followed the literature on leadership. And it soon became clear, leadership is not transactional. It's relationship. How do you have a relationship with your employees, with your colleagues, with your boss, with your clients, with those people you are serving?
Are there some examples that stick in your mind of transformations that you observe from particular leaders who went through HPL?
Which one? There are so many. I guess one that stands out is a person from the Middle East who was there, and he really had the best intention, but he did not focus on bonding. And he took that concept of bonding and really ran with it. And when he said, well, in my culture, we don't bond. We don't tell our daughters we love them. We don't even tell people around us we care. And that whole idea of caring to dare. And when he heard others say, well, no, I'm from that culture also. That is not true. That you can say I love you. You can say I care. And he was shocked. And that night he went back to the hotel. He had 6 daughters, called them and said to each one, I love you, and had a brief conversation. And then his wife got on the phone. Where are you? I'm in Lausanne. What are you doing there? And he hadn't even told them that he was coming or what it was about. And that was truly transformational. Or somebody in this week's program who, when they understood secure base, called their wife, went back to the hotel that night, called their wife, and he just said something as simple as, you are my anchor. You are my secure base. Thank you. And she just cried and cried and cried. They had a 1-hour conversation. And so these are these transformational moments that always involve caring, bonding, emotion, a switch of states. And this is not what people think of as leadership, but it is leadership, leading self. So it's not just leading other people, but it's leading self, leading others, and for people who come to HPL, they're leading organizations.
And there is something about HPL that touches them as human beings, which means that oftentimes they feel, I can change how I am not just at work, but also at home.
Well, this is one of the big changes. The idea that leadership is not something you do at work. It's not like a shirt or a coat or a dress. It's something you are. It's who you are as a person. So that bridge between personal life and professional life and what you do in an organization is a bridge. It's connected. And how you are as a person will affect how you are influencing and leading others.
One of the influences in your life that has led to a certain approach in HPL is that you were a hostage negotiator. And you have a powerful metaphor that you talk about in class that maybe you can elaborate a little bit. You tell people, don't be held a hostage to anything, right, including yourself.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, this is metaphor that got Peter Larange's interest in the very beginning, and that's part of why I came and was teaching conflict resolution and mediation. So to be a hostage physically, you have to be able to, when a negotiator comes in, create a bond, understand the pain point, make concessions. And it's amazing, a 95% success rate. Now, it's just a small leap to think about being a psychological hostage. So without a weapon, you are a hostage to a boss, to a colleague, to a situation in your personal life, to spouses, teachers, etc. And so you can even be a hostage not only to others or to situations, but to yourself. So that's why we use only one case, them, and to unravel how they are holding themselves hostage. If they're filled with anxiety and fear and regret and anger and all these internal states. So this becomes a powerful metaphor to enter that whole arena. How do I develop myself as a leader? How am I being held hostage? And how can I set myself free?
And have you ever found yourself being held hostage when you're teaching HPL?
Which time? Yeah, in the very beginning, John, it was executives coming and skeptical. What is all this about? What do you mean by empathy? What do you mean by caring? I'm here to get a result. So I would be challenged in different ways. And we would have these powerful dialogues of how could they be more successful. And so that's been one of the transitions. First of all, in those days, I was very patient. I was compassionate because I understand if they'd not been exposed to it, caring as a leader seems like a foreign concept. And in the beginning, people came and were skeptical, but it changed over time. Now we have 80% of people coming because somebody recommends the program. So they come in with more of an open mind. And so this whole transition of being able to understand, but in those days, there was often somebody in the audience who was trying to make a scene. And they would challenge me in a public forum. And so we would have a dialogue, but that was one way I was a particular hostage.
But I guess over time, you've learned maybe the way a stand-up comedian learns how to deal with a heckler in the audience. You've by now seen plenty of skeptics, and you know in a way how to get them to see things from a different point of view.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair enough. I never take it personal. I just don't take it personal. And occasionally I'll be attacked. And especially when we do the grief, because grief is such a provocative subject, the whole idea of loss. And some people really are challenged by that. It takes them out of their comfort zone. And so I'm compassionate to that. And I think I know what I'm doing. And I'm passionate about what I do. And I am willing to take risks. So I think that's been one change I've made, is that I'm more willing to take risks than I did in the past because I have a sense of what I'm trying to accomplish and I know what I can accomplish. And then the whole idea of psychological safety. When Amy Edmondson introduced her psychological safety concepts, this was another game changer. A big one was with Dan's emotional intelligence. But then the idea of how do you create the safety for people to go into areas of discomfort. And I get very nervous. Well, I don't get nervous, but I get concerned when I hear people say, well, I'm uncomfortable with that. That's the very reason they should probably go there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Looking back over the 25 years, are there one or two things that are kind of highlights, accomplishments, things that kind of stand out for you about HPL?
Well, I think it's been IMD's attitude towards HPL. In the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism. And many faculty, I think up to 20 faculty have gone through the program. That, for me, is something I'm very proud of, that I can talk to my colleagues, have them come, have them experience it, and then we talk about it. So that was something very important to have. The other thing is to see how IMD has supported me. I mean, this is something unique. We don't think it happens in other business schools. There's many forms of leadership training all over the world. They're good forms, but they're mostly trade training. This is a different approach.
If you think about thousands of alumni who have gone through HPL, big alumni community, in fact, now.
I think it's probably around 10,000 as our estimate.
Are there one or two examples of alumni that you highlight where you're kind of particularly struck by what they've done post-program or what you've learned that the program has meant to them?
Yeah. Well, when you hear somebody who comes and they're struggling in their job, and I have one particular person in mind who was very low on engagement studies. People were leaving. He was a toxic leader. And he came and he got it. He was really motivated to change. And he had very low scores on engagement. Just the idea of creating a bond, creating a relationship. He went back, and within a year, he took those scores from about 60% or even lower up to 95%. Now that's a dramatic change. And it was all because he would sit and talk to people. He would ask questions. What is it you need? How can I help you? And he treated people with respect, and he created bonds. And I had another CFO who, the CEO died, unfortunately. So they appointed the CFO. And so he came, he was struggling. He was really struggling. And it's hard to believe, but he was very reluctant to talk to people. So he would park his car far away, walk in the back door, go up the back steps to his office. And when he came, he said, I'm failing. Can you help me succeed? I said, well, what's going on? And when I heard the story, we got a contract with him after the program to go in the front door, park in the front door, and go one floor at a time. There were 6 floors. And to say hello to people, to bond. And it changed the whole way he was leading. They suddenly saw him as a human being. You see, this has been one of the, well, you know, John, a big change in leadership. It's not transactional. It's relationship. How do you build relationship? And we get so many people who do not have relationships. So that whole question, what happened to you? What's been your relationship with your mother, your father, your grandparents, the early siblings in your life, uncles and aunts, the extended family, when you were a teenager, when you were a young adult? What is the whole series of events that you are the leader that you are now? And for some, they don't have that sense of bonding or caring. And then the first book, Hostage at the Table, was published in 2006. And that was taking this whole hostage metaphor, translating it to leadership. And that was a great success. It still is. And I thought the most interesting part would be conflict management. Lo and behold, people said to me, what's this secure base idea? It was, how do I build that trust? So that's when we launched the Care to Dare book with the research in that, and it was released in 2011. And that still is also a game changer. How can leaders be caring? And that doesn't mean you are a weak leader. If you're emotionally available and accessing your emotions, that is a resource that you have to be proud of. And so this is one of the most common things people leave with a transformation. I'm an emotional being who happens to think,
Right.
rather than the other way around.
Yeah. So I hope you don't mind me revealing in the interview that you're going to be 80 soon.
I'm very proud of that, although I'm shocked. I can't believe it.
And I'm wondering, we talked about the experience you had as a hostage negotiator, which of course taught you so much about conflict resolution, negotiation, and so on. But that's not the only profession you've had. I wonder, are there other experiences that you had through your life that prepared you to have the impact that you had in HPL?
Well, what happened to you is a question I relate to personally, because I grew up on a farm. I'm an old farm boy. Who would believe I'm here in Switzerland working with all my colleagues here at IMD and a distinguished professor teaching leadership. So I had a very good relationship with my mother. I had a strained relationship with my father, but we managed to heal that. And I learned in those early experiences how to be able to dialogue, negotiate. My father was a great negotiator. He would deal with the Amish buying chickens, and he ran a poultry farm. And then I was in the Catholic seminary for 10 years. So that was very influential in understanding yourself. I didn't even have money. I didn't use money till I was 22. It was all a different approach to life. Right. And then when I got out, I was really trying to catch up, it seemed like. So I was initially working in a factory to make money while I went to the university. That was an education, how to get your hands dirty. And my grandfather always was an influence of the earth. He could go out and put his hands in the earth, and he just loved that. And so that was something that I always maintained, manual labor, the ability to touch the earth. So among the other things, I was a hostage negotiator, held hostage 4 times myself. I'm happy to be able to talk myself out. Right. And that was a game changer because I decided I didn't want to carry a weapon. I was being trained to carry a weapon, not to be a police officer, but to have a weapon at my access. But words were my weapon. And then I had a radio show for 10 years. I was a radio host. John, this was amazing. Matters of the Mind. And it was a morning show. Okay. So it was mostly little old ladies who would call in, and they fell in love with me. And when I would travel, and that was sometimes right. I would come to Europe, and they say, "Oh, Dr. Kohlrieser, don't go to Europe. Something might happen. There's terrorists over there." They would worry about me, and when I come back, and they say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're back. We missed you." And it was a show in which I could provoke emotion, not artificially, but to talk about loss. And over the years of working with police, working as a psychotherapist, it became so clear the role of loss and grief. And so not to induce it forcefully, but to safely bring that into the arena.
Oh, amazing stories. Amazing stories.
I love these little old ladies, and it was a show that was a little bit of entertainment, right. but a little bit of self-help, and that was a big choice. That's the other thing in my life, choices, because I had a chance to I had a million audience in the Cincinnati-Dayton area, but I had the chance to go to Cleveland, Ohio for an international right. or a national show, and I decided not to. I didn't want to do that. Okay. I wanted to go in a different direction. So that was a benchmark moment to focus on where I was going. And then I was trained as a psychotherapist, so I had a big practice, had 9 therapists working for me, and we were a team. We worked with people and focused on violence and violence prevention and all of those difficult cases. So that was a game changer until my son died. You know, I have an oldest son who died in an accident. And that was a moment where I really made a decision that I wanted something different. And I was trained as a mediator, working as a psychotherapist, and I decided then to start traveling and a little bit to bring transactional analysis. I was president of the Transactional Analysis Association to Europe. And that was a very important period. But then the therapists over here were well trained, or the mediators, I trained a lot of people. That's when I moved to the conflict management. And from conflict management to leadership at IMD.
Well, so tell us that last step. How did you come across IMD? How did you get connected with us, maybe with Peter Larange? What's the story of your introduction here?
What I realized from hostage negotiation was that this was leadership in action. I mean, they get a 95% success rate, not by telling people what to do, but by influencing. And this has been one of the big game changers in leadership, going from command and control, telling people what to do, to leadership as relationship. That's what hostage negotiators do. So it was very small leap, although one way a big leap, to go from conflict management to leadership. And that's where IMD has always been standing behind me.
Even after this long career, my experience working with you is you're always still learning. And I wonder if there are a couple of key learnings, maybe from the HPL journey or things that have happened recently. What are some things that you've learned yourself not so long ago?
Well, one of my great mentors was Warren Bennis. And Warren always said, the day you stop learning, that's the day you stop being a leader. And so I've always been curious, always wanting to learn. And one of the key moments was to realize that leadership is not telling people what to do. It's influencing. So that became very important. And a key moment was when I met Dan Goldman, and I really got to understand what emotional intelligence is about. And that whole idea that we are emotional beings who happen to think. And of course, that fit with the early training that I got with Carl Rogers. That's still a fundamental influence on me. I mean, if we went through my secure bases who helped me develop who I am, I'm standing on the shoulders of I don't know how many people. And unconditional positive regard is very important. And so that became part of the whole experience of what I could bring into the leadership arena in high performance leadership.
George, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, John.